effort to try to address it's an effort to try to address some of the problems that exist with the Electoral College, not necessarily reflecting the popular vote. So I'm not going to give you more details, just that teaser, and encourage you to register. We will be sending out flyers and information about that and encourage you to sign up for it. So again, you may want to mark your calendars for June 21st at 11:30 a.m. So joining me on our team today is Ann Wakely, who you've already heard from this morning, and she is the current president of the Marin League. And we have Scott McEwen, who was on the planning team as well from Marin County, Karen Weeks, who was on the planning committee from Sonoma County, and our tech person today is from Marin County, and that's Doug Cooper. And he's behind the scenes making all of this work, and we're really grateful to him for signing up to do that. So he'll continue to let people into the program and help us with any technological glitches today. So to tell you what to expect today, Ann's going to do a short presentation about the history of the voting rights. And then when Jared Huṋ�man arrives, we will introduce him. And we have some predetermined questions that Karen will be asking. We do ask that you hold all your questions on our presentation to the end, because we only have about a half an hour with Jared Huṋ�man, and we want to maximize the use of that time, and don't want questions to kind of get in the way of his presentation or make it so we can't hear from him. So if you have questions for Jared Huṋ�man, please put them in the chat. You can either type your question in there, or you can just put your name and a question mark, and then as we have time, we'll be calling on you to ask your question. So that's how we'd like to proceed. We hope at the end of his presentation, we'll have time for questions while he's still here. And once he has to depart, we will stick around to answer questions that you might have in general or about Ann's presentation. So we ask for your patience with that process. If you have a hard time remembering your questions, you can put them in the chat at any time. You don't have to wait to put your question out there. So go ahead and do that, or jot it down if you want to ask it live. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ann.
I unmuted myself, which is what you folks will need to do if you want to talk. We're going to mute everybody. Doug's going to mute everybody now, so that you will just remember. I mean,
he muted you as well, Ann. He muted you. Oh, there you go.
Okay. All right. Now I'm unmuted. Okay. So Debbie already talked about the questions. So if you have questions, put them in the chat or put a question mark. I am going to share my screen, and I'm going to do a little PowerPoint presentation. So bear with me. This is always a little bit tricky. Okay, can you see it? Someone who, okay, good. All right, great. Oops, sorry. All right, so so this is the name of our third talk in the series, Voting Rights Reform and Money in Politics. As you know, the voting rights right now it's hugely in the news. There's so much going on. We had in 2020 the largest voter turnout and what has been called the most secure election in our history. Since then, we've seen hundreds of restrictive voting bills passed by state legislatures or pending in state legislatures in more than 40 states. Texas, Georgia, and Arizona are notable in this regard, but it's all over the place. There are many bills in the works to kind of get rid of the expansion of opportunities to vote that were put in place in 2020, and to further tighten opportunities to vote. And making it harder. And unfortunately, as you know, these do not affect people just uniformly across the board. The negative effects are primarily felt by people, Black and brown people, older people, young people, people with disabilities, people who otherwise may have some barriers to actually voting if it's restricted. So at the same time that we have these laws trying to be passed or being passed in the states, we have two really important laws at the federal level that are being considered. And those are the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So we're going to talk about those a little bit today. And I just love this quote from John Lewis, which I believe was in one of the last pieces he wrote: "Your vote is precious, almost sacred. It is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have to create a more perfect union." He also said at other times, your vote is important. If it weren't, they wouldn't keep trying to keep you from voting. So just to keep his words in mind. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is show you a little movie. And this film is an ABC News film. I don't have the exact date it was made. It was made in 2020. It's called What is Voter Suppression? But what's lovely about this film is it's more than just what is voter suppression. It really gives a history of federal involvement in voting rights in this country and the history of voter suppression. So it's about 9-10 minutes long. So we'll watch that, providing I can get it started.
Long way to go to get all of the people registered of voting age, but if we can get 500 registered today, this would be a magnificent step forward.
Voter suppression has been a part of the United States political scene since the nation's inception.
Never saw a night like this in my life.
What's happening with the voting polls, with the post office, I didn't want to take any chance.
Amid a global pandemic, the fight for voting rights echoes that of the 19th and 20th centuries.
Voter suppression exists when you have leaders who try to prevent you or discourage you from voting. When they use undermining the fundamental premise of voting to block your participation, that is suppression.
Although the methods have evolved, voter suppression continues to impact American elections in 2020.
Voter suppression now doesn't involve dogs on leashes or people with police batons. Very often it's more subtle. It's somebody being removed from the voting rolls. It's a polling place quietly closing down. It's a change in a rule that looks technical but actually affects Black and brown voters the most.
If voting didn't matter, then we wouldn't do this. Don't try to suppress our vote.
Today, issues such as gerrymandering, the act of outlining voting districts in favor of a particular political party, and mail-in voting amid the threat of COVID-19 remain hot-button voter suppression issues leading up to the 2020 presidential election.
The last 2 years, 17 million people were removed from the voting rolls in the United States, many of them eligible voters.
I think you see it today with COVID, for example, with the fact that COVID is having a particularly devastating effect on Black and brown communities in this country because of a longstanding history of lack of access to good health care, wage inequality, employment inequality, housing inequality, you name it. And then on top of that, not taking very common sense steps to ensure that voters have access to alternatives to casting a ballot other than in person, indoors, in a crowded polling location, to me, amounts to voter suppression because of the way it interacts with this long, terrible and unfortunate history this country has had with racism.
When the country started, only white men who owned property could vote. We weren't anything like what we would consider a democracy. But the Declaration of Independence said that government is legitimate only when it rests on the consent of the governed. And that was a pretty radical idea that began to change people's thinking.
It wasn't until the post-Civil War days that the U.S. government began amending the Constitution to reflect equal opportunity for all. though the topic would be hotly contested for decades to come.
The 13th Amendment freed the slaves. The 14th Amendment tried to guarantee equality, but what was really needed was the 15th Amendment to say it was unconstitutional to deny the right to vote based on race. And that meant Black men had the right to vote.
In the immediate aftermath of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, you saw, some legislatures in the South, almost half of those legislatures were Black members, and almost immediately once the Jim Crow laws came into effect, they dropped to almost zero in terms of representation, in terms of registration.
In response to the national amendments, Southern states enforced rules commonly known as the Jim Crow laws, legalizing racial segregation in public places, particularly between white and Black Americans. As it pertained to voting, a poll tax was enforced in the South to discourage Black voters who could not afford to pay, and literacy tests were implemented at some locations to stop those who were uneducated from participating in the voting process.
So you had these literacy tests, or recite the preamble of the Constitution, or guess how many jelly beans are in this jar kind of idea, but only Black voters had to pass those tests.
White men, however, were allowed to vote without passing such tests thanks to a grandfather clause that said they could vote if their ancestors had voted before 1867.
But of course, if your grandfather was a slave, he couldn't. It looked neutral, but in fact, it was designed with precision to go after Black voters.
By 1915, the grandfather clause was ruled unconstitutional, paving the way for a series of new amendments in the 20th century, most notably granting women the right to vote in 1920.
Sometimes history books say they were given the right to vote. We weren't given anything. It was a suffrage movement every bit as fierce, creative, as protest as any other movement in American history.
Nearly 70 years after they were first enforced, poll taxes were abolished and literacy tests were outlawed shortly thereafter.
Now, in this whole county, there's only 200 Negro registered voters. The past year, we have had something like 3,000 people in that courthouse or down there trying to register, but they would not allow them to register.
The civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s led to the next shift on the voting front upon passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
The Voting Rights Act was the most effective civil rights law probably in American history. It said that states with a history of discrimination in voting couldn't make changes in their voting rules unless they got permission from the Justice Department or a federal court. And that fact made it so that millions and millions of Black men and women for the first time could vote. But not just that, everybody really was eligible to vote.
For it is not enough just to give men rights. They must be able to use those rights in their personal pursuit of happiness.
In 1993, the National Voter Registration Act, or Motor Vote Act, opened up more opportunities for citizens to register as voters.
As many as 35% of otherwise eligible voters in our nation are not registered.
It is the act that gives you the ability to register to vote when you're getting a driver's license, or if you are getting assistance at a public assistance agency. It's one of those things that's taken on increased importance today during this COVID period of time, where your traditional voter registration opportunities, the League of Women Voters, or the NAACP going out to grocery stores and things like that, try to get them to register to vote, aren't really happening.
The fight for voting rights, however, suffered a setback in 2013 when the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was ruled unconstitutional.
Today, the United States Supreme Court announced its decision in the case of Shelby County v. Holder and invalidated an essential part of the Voting Rights Act, a cornerstone of American civil rights law. This decision represents a serious setback for voting rights and has the potential to negatively affect millions of Americans across the country.
The Supreme Court struck down the coverage formula from the Voting Rights Act, which determined which states and jurisdictions had to seek federal preclearance or permission to adjust voting requirements in a given area.
Chief Justice Roberts said, that kind of racism is kind of a thing of the past. That was then, this is now.
And it is up to us to see that we remedy this in as meaningful, as fair a manner as possible.
In 2019, a new bill aimed to restore sections of the Voting Rights Act.
When the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act's strongest provisions, in the Shelby County case, it said to Congress, you know, you can fix this. Well, Congress has a duty to fix it. And there's legislation that passed the House of Representatives in 2019, last year, that's been renamed the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, that would restore the strength of the Voting Rights Act and apply it to new conditions with new data and apply it nationwide. It passed the House. It hasn't come up for a vote in the Senate.
We are currently living in a, I think, environment where there is a strong push to put more and more restrictions in place that was emboldened and enabled with Shelby County. We have made one step forward and how many steps backwards before we go forward again?
So it's my pleasure to introduce Congressman Jared Hueinfaman. He represents California's 2nd Congressional District, which spans the north coast of the state from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border, and includes Marin, Sonoma, Mendocino, Humboldt, Trinity, and Del Norte counties. Is that the biggest district in the state?
You would think, but it's actually not.
Okay. He was first elected to Congress in November of 2012 and currently serves on the Committee on Natural Resources, Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. In the 117th Congress, he chairs the Natural Resources Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife, with jurisdiction over federal water projects, fisheries management, coastal zone, and oceans policy, and wildlife and endangered species. He also founded the Congressional Free Thought Caucus to promote sound public policy based on reason, science, and moral values, while protecting the secular character of government and championing the value of freedom of thought worldwide. Before serving in Congress, Mr. Huffman represented the North Bay for 6 years in the California Assembly, and he lives in San Rafael with his wife, Susan, who's a teacher, and their 2 children, Abby and Nathan. Welcome, Mr. Huffman.
Well, thank you, Karen, for that introduction. And it's great to visit with the League of Women Voters. Let me thank all of you for being associated with such a venerable institution, such an important part of our democracy at the ground level. And I know it's all volunteer driven. So very much appreciate the good citizenship reflected on this meeting right now. So I know you want to talk about HR1, S1, and kind of voting rights, voter suppression as one of your top concerns right now. And I'm glad that you have zeroed in on that, because I think it's just a big, big deal in this moment. I'm happy to go into more details as you like, Karen. I didn't mean to jump ahead of
No, that's fine.
Of any moderating that you might want to do.
So we did submit a couple of questions to you, but I know that there will be more from the participants. So the first question is, how would HR1/S1 change money in politics? And I know that's a huge question.
Well, it is. And, let me start by explaining that it will not change it as much as some of us would like. I happen to be a big fan of ending Citizens United and passing a new constitutional amendment. If we can't, get a new Supreme Court, whichever we could do faster is what I want to do. But if we're stuck for the time being with Citizens United and the current Supreme Court, what HR1 and S1 does is it just tries to take advantage of as much constitutional leeway as we have on dark money and money in politics. The basic 2 pillars of it are disclosure, to do a better job of understanding, where some of this campaign spending is coming from, and hopefully putting an end to dark money, and then empowering small donors, which can sort of be a counterweight to some of the big donors. And there's a tax credit provision in HR1 that would basically give everyone, I believe it's $75 in the form of a tax credit to contribute to a congressional campaign, and that would get leveraged with matching funds, public matching funds, as an incentive for candidates to fund their campaigns in that more democratic way where they can get lots and lots of small donors instead of hanging out on K Street or with some of these dark money folks and just letting a few people write massive checks to fund campaigns. So I think that's part. There's some other technical provisions about reforming, the constitution of the FEC and doing some other things. But I would say within the bounds of Citizens United, these are the top things that we can do.
Thank you. And then staying on HR1 and S1, would those prevent the states from implementing voter suppression actions?
Yeah, so the other piece, the very important and timely piece of this is reinstating some voting rights authority that has been lost in recent years with the Supreme Court's unfortunate ruling. So it goes beyond just things like pre-clearance. It includes other institutional barriers to voting. And you know what's happening in Georgia and Texas and Florida and many other states right now. It's just the most disheartening and naked attempt to make it harder for certain people to vote. And HR1 and S1 would probably be our best response to that by breaking down some of these barriers. Overcomplicated voter registration systems. These bills would require a phased-in automatic voter registration system in every state. So that would just be a huge improvement. States that are trying to limit voting hours, limit access to drop-off boxes, things like this, there would be a new set of minimum federal standards that would apply. States that are trying to purge voter rolls, disqualify people who have served sentences for felonies and should be allowed, as part of our rehabilitation of folks to resume voting. This would allow that to happen. And of course, long wait times and other things, that's part of this legislation as well.
Thank you. Could you just briefly talk about the differences between S1 and HR1?
Yeah, I think there's been some additional flexibility and some phasing in of some of the provisions. I haven't, studied the latest S1 draft, but my understanding is that, it's more or less some minor changes along those lines.
Okay. And then we had a question from a participant that said that she indicated the Senate is likely to filibuster S1 and cause it to fail. Is there any movement around stopping that?
Well, there's an effort, that's for sure. And I think you've seen President Biden at least take his rhetoric up to a higher level to try to create more pressure. It comes down to probably two people in the Senate, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, that are keeping the filibuster alive in a way that threatens our ability to have free and fair elections. So there should be pressure on those two, and it should be growing. And I think it is. In fact, the most recent statement on this that I heard from Joe Manchin seemed like he was open to reconsideration. Maybe I'm being wishful because he's been really terrible on this in the last few months, but it seemed that he struck a fairly different tone in his most recent statement. And I think that's because it's just becoming so abundantly clear what Republicans are doing and how insidious it is, and how the filibuster is enabling them.
Do you think that the president's selection of the vice president to lead the effort around voter rights will help with this?
Yeah, I think that's part of his elevation of this issue and kind of the ratcheting up of pressure. I believe that sends a message that this is going to be a very focused pressure campaign on a very small number of U.S. senators to get this thing done.
And then we have a question from one of the participants about the chance of getting the 6 Republicans who voted for the January 6th investigation to support S1.
Yeah, I really don't know. I'd be speculating about where Republican senators are right now. I think even ones that we think of as in play and ones that did support the January 6th commission, like Mitt Romney, have not said especially nice things about S1. So I'm not sure that there can be any Republican support for a bill like this, because even the good Republicans, from my perspective, sorry to use such judgment-laden terms here, but even the good Republicans are terrible on these issues. It has just become kind of a partisan article of faith for my colleagues in the Republican Party that it needs to be hard to vote, and that it's okay to have all these voter ID requirements and other things that we know have a disparate impact on minorities and disadvantaged communities, and it just drives down Democratic voting. Even the good Republicans are pretty comfortable with that.
Are there any questions from, okay, here's a question. What is the likelihood of the passage of HR4 and the full restoration of the 1965 Voting Rights Act?
Yeah, I think that references the John Lewis Act, which is kind of a companion piece of legislation. Well, I know that Joe Manchin has said good things about that. What I don't know is whether there are 10 Republicans in the Senate to help get around the filibuster. I'm skeptical that there would be, again, for the reason I just mentioned. This has become very much of a partisan red line. You don't want to make it easier for Democrats to vote. So I think probably both bills, which should pass, neither is a substitute for the other, by the way, are probably going to have to find a way around the filibuster.
Thank you. Anne, you have a question for the Congressman?
Yeah, actually, it was about the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and I know it has not been reintroduced in this Congress, right? So it has to be reintroduced in the House and passed there first. Why is it being delayed? What's going on there?
I don't know, and I can look into that. I don't have a ready explanation for that. I thought it had been reintroduced, so I probably need to either be corrected or.
Well, you may be right, and I may be wrong.
Yeah, we'll figure that one out. I think though that a decision has been made to make HR1 and S1 kind of the flagship for reform in this space.
And yet, we need the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act in order to restore the Voting Rights Act, right?
You know, I am not sure exactly where the intersection is on Voting Rights Act restoration provisions between the two bills. So I'd better not get ahead of myself, but I've supported both in the past. I will, I'm going to vote for anything that restores voting rights and makes it easier for people to vote. It just baffles me that any American could not want other Americans to vote. I mean, that's just good policy, good democracy, good social justice. But we're still fighting this pernicious scourge of trying to make trying to disenfranchise a whole bunch of American citizens from their voting rights in the year 2021. It's remarkable.
Would it be helpful for those of us not in his district to email or call Manchin's office?
I don't know what would be helpful with Joe Manchin. I really don't. He's an enigma to me. I don't know if hearing from people in Northern California is going to reach his heart or his brain, but I certainly think that the kind of pressure that President Biden and Vice President Harris and the national media and many others are starting to bring to bear, as well as his colleagues in the Senate, who I know are really letting him hear it. I think that could have an impact.
We had a question about what measures are currently being taken to address the filibuster.
So this is it. This is the most likely way to get filibuster reform, voting rights. I think the idea of a blanket filibuster repeal or reform, although I would like to see it, is much less likely. But I think given this moment, given the stakes in the coming elections and everything that's going on in the Republican Party and in some of these states, trying to get Manchin and Sinema to allow a voting rights exception to the filibuster. You know, we have chipped away at the filibuster over the years. Both parties have. They've created exceptions for certain types of confirmation, certain types of legislation. So it would be, wouldn't be unprecedented to say we are now going to exempt voting rights and election related legislation from the filibuster. And that's, I think, our best chance to get there.
Thank you. So there was a number of questions or comments by one of our participants about having a march on Washington. Let me find the first one. About a march on Washington next week regarding Senate Bill 1.
Sounds great. I love the idea of a vaccinated march on Washington. That would be powerful.
And then also a question on why haven't we heard Justice Roberts and others talking about the real life outcome of their hand in destroying democracy? So.
Well, I think Justice Roberts is pretty comfortable with the outcomes from Citizen United. I think some of our fellow Americans think that all of this corporate money, all of this dark money in politics is just fine. And we just have a fundamental disagreement about that.
So I don't see any other questions coming in. Do you have anything you'd like to share with us about what else is going on?
Well, there's a lot going on, and I could certainly speak to any other issue you might be concerned about. But let me add that two other pieces of this legislation that you're supporting, and thank you for that, that I think are really important, are ending partisan gerrymandering. So California is now going through a pretty orderly process of updating our district lines pursuant to an independent commission that, if it continues to go well, won't have a trace of partisan politics. It'll just be a fair and rational drawing of district lines the way it ought to work. But some states are still just making the most odious partisan sausage out of their political districts. And the things that we can expect to come out of Texas and a number of other states are just going to be awful. They'll be litigated. They will help perpetuate again, I'm going to wax a little partisan on this, but they'll help perpetuate the power of a Republican Party that is demographically and politically drifting further and further out of touch with the majority of Americans and even Texans. And so it's a really insidious mechanism for disconnecting really political power from where public opinion actually is. So very important that we make that independent. More states are doing it independently, Michigan, Arizona, a number of other states. We just need to make that the baseline, though, for every state in America. And that's just one of the more, I think, impactful pieces of this legislation. You're going to hear a lot in the next few days and weeks about the care economy. This is part of the infrastructure conversation that we're having. And in addition to voting rights and these election issues we've been talking about, super important institutional issues, our ability to deliver an infrastructure package for this country, I think is just vitally important. We need it to position our economy to be competitive for the 21st century. And we also needed to tackle the climate crisis, which is should be a driving consideration for all of us right now. We had this great experiment during the pandemic. What would massive behavioral change do to emissions? And we saw that even in virtually shutting down the global economy for the better part of a year, you saw a reduction of slightly less, I think, than 7% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's not good enough. The science tells us we have to do a bit better than that every single year between now and 2050, and those have to be compounding reductions in order to keep this planet livable. So the takeaway from that is all of the embedded emissions that are in our infrastructure, the way we move goods and people, our buildings, no amount of behavioral change will get you there. You have to tackle all those embedded emissions in our infrastructure. And this is probably the best opportunity any of us will ever have to do that. So you're just going to hear a huge push on that front. I hope it can be bipartisan. Realistically, it won't be, though. Our Republican colleagues are just not ready to either deal with transforming, decarbonizing the economy or paying for it. So I think you're going to see an effort, but you'll see this fall back to something that'll be, unfortunately, along party lines. But I still think we can get it done, and we should get it done. And the reason that we're talking about caregivers and childcare and other things like that in that conversation is we want to have the broadest possible vision of infrastructure. It's not just roads and bridges. It's not even just the electrical grid and broadband. It is the people that enable our economy to work, and that means including the people that allow us to go to work, so we don't have to take care of sick relatives and children and so forth. So we'll try to be very expansive in our notion of infrastructure and in our support for those aspects of it. And I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's good policy. I also think it could be good politics. I think people want to see this happen. And it's a deliverable that I know my Democratic colleagues and I feel like is probably pretty key to our ability to hold on to the majority in the 2022 midterms and beyond.
Thank you. Then staying on the environment, we had a question about if you could comment on the ANWR drilling permit retraction and any prospect for neutralizing some other Trump environmental decisions.
Great news yesterday. The Biden administration and Interior Secretary Deb Haaland invalidated some leases that were awarded to drill in the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge. This is something I've been fighting tooth and nail since I got to Congress. And in a power play, the Republicans snuck Arctic drilling into their 2017 tax cut bill. Most people don't even realize that. So they put an Arctic drilling mandate in there, and they started rushing forward to try to kind of shortcut environmental laws, get the reviews done, and issue leases before Democrats could stop them. And they did get a lease sale underway at the tail end of the Trump presidency. But so much work has gone into educating people about the perils of drilling in the Arctic and the social stigma for banks that might finance it, that almost nobody bid on these leases. They had promised billions in revenues to the taxpayers as a result of these leases, and it came in at pennies on the dollar of what was promised. And in fact, the major bidder was the Alaska State Development Commission, who only did it because they were so terribly embarrassed that no major oil companies were even bidding. So it was bottom feeders. It was a virtual giveaway of the Arctic Refuge to oil interests, and they completely violated the law in their rush to get this lease sale out the door. So that's what culminated yesterday in the administration invalidating those leases. They will start the review again. We will try to make sure that it is rigorous and foreboding for anyone who may seek to drill in the Arctic. And as we do that, we'll try to lock in permanent protection and undo that unfortunate legislation from 2017. That was the Arctic. Was there a second piece of that question?
Let me go back up and see. I'm sorry.
I understand, Representative Huffman, that you in fact have another meeting you have to get to.
That tends to happen.
So I don't know if there is another quick question or if we need to let you go. You have an 11 o'clock apparently.
Oh, you're doing good staff work for me. Thank you. That's great.
I heard this from Jenny.
Yeah, she does good staff work too. I can take one more.
Well, this might be a long one, but let me throw it out. What do you think about expanding the Supreme Court?
Not going to happen.
Okay, that was a quick one.
Okay, that was a quick one.
I mean, I would be open to it, but I think it's the politics aren't there to make it happen right now, and you know, kind of pouring our energies into that in this moment would be not only provocative and divisive, but unsuccessful. So let's work in other ways to go forward.
Okay. Well, that is it for us. And I just want to give you a heartfelt thank you from the League of Women Voters of both Marin and Sonoma County for giving us your time. And we'd love to have you back sometime. So.
Oh, I would love it. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure. And thank you all again for your good works.
And thank you to your great staff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Anne, do you want to take any questions from the group about your presentation?
Sure, and I would love to talk a little bit more about the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, if people are interested in hearing about it, because I feel like it's I noticed a note in the chat that said that HR1 S1 would restore the Voting Rights Act. Well, it doesn't exactly. What it does, it says it pledges to restore the Voting Rights Act. But the problem is what was declared unconstitutional is Section 4, which defines who is going to be covered and which states and which subdivisions of states are covered and require pre-clearance to change their voting rights laws. So the Supreme Court said that that was unconstitutional. It was out of date. And I think I can see why they thought it was out of date. But the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act actually updates the formula. So we can talk a little bit more about that, or I can answer questions.
Alice Smith has her hand up. So Alice, do you have a comment?
Yes, just I totally agree with what the last speaker said, Anne. Exactly right on. But people do not understand that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is very much alive and well.
Yeah. And
in fact, has been used in many pieces of litigation in order to oppose some of the acts which are, and the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, and others have been litigants in these decisions. What the importance and what I think I'd like to reiterate is that it is setting out what the National Voter Registration Act did for how to register, but it's setting out the time, place, and manner of voting, which is empty in the Constitution unless under Section 1.4, Congress sets the rules. Otherwise, the state can act in these fields. And so it has redistricting is completely set through. It has financing. It has voter ID laws. It has the signature recognition. It has a slew of very prophylactic acts to overcome the enormous amount of voter suppression that has started since 2010. Anyway, I just wanted to make that point. And I'm very impressed with this, and I'd like to get hold of that ABC News film. Did you say it was in the chat?
Yes, we put the link for it in the chat. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And we can do it again because there's a lot of questions and things in the chat. So we'll put it in there again.
And in this PowerPoint, I have a lot of details about HR1 S1, which we can look at together if you like. But I think there were some more questions. I'm sorry about that. Were there
I just wanted to comment that we just did a whole thing on HR1 and S1. Well, not a whole thing, but we showed the clips of a film called All In, The Fight for Democracy, which was put out by Stacey Abrams. And I think that's something you guys would really want to watch. I think it's a great film. But what's impressive to me about this bill is, or these bills, is how much the federal government is willing to tell the states how they must run their registration and elections. It's just, to me, and Alice, you tell me if I'm right, but it seems very unprecedented. The states have always had the right to do what they want, and these bills would direct them, and also it really does restore coverage as needed. And I think that that's what was gutted in the 65 Act. So I think it's incredible. Well, it's all of these things that are showing on the screen now would be law in all the states, and that is just remarkable.
Yeah, it's huge. It's a huge bill, and it what's really cool about it is it's not inventing these things from scratch. What it's doing is looking at what states are doing that are good things to be doing to make it easier for people to vote. And it's used, and also other election reform like the redistricting. And it's taking those state laws and state standards and making it a standard for the nation for federal voting, for federal elections. It's like 900 pages long, this thing. It covers voting and elections and some of the things that are here on the screen. It also actually takes the methods that we're using now in California for redistricting and makes that the standard. Requires independent redistricting commissions and requires transparency and public participation. It outlaws partisan gerrymandering. Racial gerrymandering is already outlawed in Section 2. Somebody's phone is ringing. In Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, racial gerrymandering is outlawed, but partisan gerrymandering is not outlawed, except in certain states like California. And also, as Congressman Huffman was talking about, it reforms campaign finance. But what it doesn't do is it does not restore the Voting Rights Act section that was declared unconstitutional, which is Section 4, which decides who is going to be covered and who is required to have pre-clearance. You need the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act to be passed in order for that to happen, because what it does, it restores pre-clearance with an updated formula, which will replace what's in, or update what's in Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. And it, the last time the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized, I believe in 2003 or 2006 or something like that. Let me see, I've got it written down. But what they didn't do, what they haven't done for a long time, is change the reference date for deciding when people were in violation of voting rights as laid out in the Voting Rights Act. And it was set at sometime in the 70s, and that is considered outdated by the Supreme Court. And what the Voting Rights Advancement Act will do is to change that to the last 25 years, so it updates it. It changes, adds to some of the practices that have been of concern, things like voter ID laws, stuff like that. But it's important that this bill also be passed. And I did double check, and as far as I can tell, it has not been formally introduced in 2021. Now, I could be wrong about that. It could have happened since I looked, but that's what I learned in looking at it. But it's both of these laws are really critical. Both these pieces of legislation are really critical, and we need to, I don't know, ask people to vote for them, except our people are already voting for them. So,
and I have another question. I'm confused. You know, in 1993, when motor voter passed, all the states had to do it. Seems to me that I don't understand that these bills would just be for federal elections.
They would just be for federal elections, but the thing about the motor voter is I think it's an opt-in, or it can be an opt-in.
Oh.
What HR1 S1 does, it makes it opt-out. So you will be automatically registered unless you choose not to be. But yes, it is, all these laws are just for federal elections, but it's very unlikely that any state is going to have a separate system for state and local elections and federal elections.
Okay.
Yeah. Alice has a question. You have to unmute yourself, Alice.
There's actually a case law that says that that's too complicated for the people, and they tried to have an independent registration for the National Voter Registration Act, so that they were trying to have one for federal law registration, one for state, to try to get more IDs and information and try to discourage people from registering to vote. And that was found unconstitutional. So I have a funny feeling that the real issue is going to be to get this passed as soon as possible, because the Roberts Court is now 6-3 in favor of doing away with independent commissions and all these other things. So we have to be very careful, and we need to pass this.
I still think that we can't really move forward on just about anything important without getting rid of the filibuster. And it seems to me it's a catch-22 from everything I've read. You can't get rid of the filibuster because we have a filibuster. And, to vote against it, it's not the two people who are opposing it. It's the 10 people who are opposing it. You have to have 60 people to vote to get rid of it. That's procedural. As far as
that's not quite right, Robin.
Okay.
In order to change a rule in the Senate, it only requires a majority.
That's right.
So they could actually change the filibuster. I don't think you'll see them totally do away with the filibuster. The filibuster has been modified over the years to create exceptions. So we've heard about budget reconciliation. And so that was carved out as an exception, that could not be a part of the filibuster. So you might see voting rights carved out as an exception to the filibuster. That would be the most likely way that this could get passed, is if if the senators decided that was important enough to make an exception to the filibuster rules for voting rights, that is the way that it could get passed. And that only requires a majority vote to change the procedure.
But it's not up right now. So
no, it's not up right now, but it could come up. Yeah, it could come up.
Thanks for that information.
Mm-hmm. So are there other questions or comments on what we've talked about today? I do want to remind people once again that we are going to have our final presentation for this year on making democracy work and that will be about the national popular vote, which is a method of ensuring that the Electoral College reflects the actual overall national popular vote. And that will be Scott Drexel presenting on that. And it'll be June 21st at 10:30 a.m. And we will be sending out an announcement on this and with the information on how to register. But please set aside that date in your calendar because that, again, is another important issue about how we conduct our elections.
Oh, and one other thing I wanted to mention about HR1 S1, and I know I don't have to convince anybody here that it's important, but another thing, a provision that's in it, it provides funds for states for revamping their election infrastructure, because in some states it's going to cost them money providing this passes to implement these laws, and the legislation takes that into account and provides money. But it's frustrating, isn't it, that we see that we are still, in fact, trying to enforce the 14th and 15th Amendments. And this is still going on. Here we are in 2021, and these constitutional amendments that were put in place a long time ago are still not being truly enforced. And I don't know, I find it very frustrating. I'm sure everyone else does too, but we just have to keep fighting. We have to keep complaining. We have to know as much as we possibly can about this so that we can talk to other people and answer questions. We have to understand it well ourselves. And if you have friends in other states, tell them to write their Congress people and tell them what they think. But yeah, racism is alive and well, unfortunately.
The other way that the League is combating these voter suppression efforts at the state level is the National League is filing lawsuits, sometimes alone, sometimes frequently in partnership with other organizations. But that's the other way that we can fight these measures. But then, you know, the ultimate resolution of that could be the Supreme Court, which is not real optimistic at this point. So it's much better if we can get this legislation passed at a national level than depend on the courts right now to remedy these suppression efforts that are going into effect.
Any comments or questions or?
Well, thank you all for attending today. This is obviously a super important topic to all of us and to the League, and it's something we've been fighting about for over 100 years, and the battle goes on. I mean, it's kind of amazing that we have to still be fighting this 100 years from, you know, when we originally got the right to vote. And actually the fight has gone way before that. So I think this is something that's not going to go away in our nation. Our nation was a great experiment.